so let people join. Okay, this is reassuring. I can see people joining. We had a bit of a hiatus last month, for which I apologize, but we're back loud and proud. Please say hello in the chat. Let us know where you're from. Thanks for dragging yourselves away from the Sue Gray report. Hopefully we should get this done before PMQs. We will start in a couple of minutes, just once people have joined. Okay, I'm going to kick off. Waddscon suffered a tech fail, but we fixed the gremlins. It's good to be back. Apologies for last month. Thank you for your patience and understanding, and welcome back. Throughout 2020, Waddscon's exploring how public relations practitioners work with journalists. Over the series, we're exploring pitching, newsjacking, data storytelling, the relationship between owned and earned media, promoting coverage, and more. This particular event, though, is focused on working with journalists, and each of the speakers today is going to talk about different approaches to building relationships and with journalists and media pitching. It's something that's been particularly acute throughout the pandemic because we've had to rely so much on email and different forms of messaging to pitch rather than traditionally the phone. We're going to be joined by Abi Bennetts. She's first up from Propellernet. Brenda Gabriel is going to join us from Brenda Gabriel PR. Will Hobson from Rise at 7, and Fenella Rickards from Hotwire. They're each going to speak for 5 minutes or so, the regular format of Waddscon, followed by a Q&A. If you've got questions along the way, please post them in the chat or on Twitter using the hashtag Waddscon. So first of all, we've got Abi Bennetts from Propellernet. Now, Abi has a background in psychology, what she studied at university. She's brought that into her practice in applying a behavioral approach and a human insight-led approach to earned media pitches. Welcome, Abi. Abi, do you want to jump in and share your deck?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for having me. Very pleased that no tech issues this time around. Hopefully you can all see my slides. And if so, I'll get cracking. So yeah, as Stephen said, today I'm going to be talking about psychological approaches to creating standout PR pitches. So a quick intro to me. I'm a digital PR manager at Propellernet, which is a digital PR and SEO agency based in Brighton. I have 4 years experience in all things digital PR, so working at a range of different agencies throughout my career. But I actually did my undergraduate degree in psychology, and that sort of love and interest in all things the brain, how people interact with each other, has sort of stayed with me, to be honest, throughout my career so far. So I'm going to assume that most of the people on this webinar today either at least have an interest in PR or might be working as PR professionals themselves. So I don't really need to tell you that great PR is all about telling great stories. And just like my favourite CBeebies programme when I was a toddler, we as PRs, we're all story makers. So our whole jobs revolve around coming up with amazing stories on behalf of the clients that we're working with. But in order for journalists to sort of cover those stories, share the stories with their audiences, the stories that we're creating need to be engaging, they need to be relevant, and they also, most importantly, I think, need to be really persuasive. So persuasive in connecting with the brand, persuasive in, persuading audiences that are reading it. And luckily for us, or luckily for me, there's quite a lot of psychological research that backs up what makes a persuasive story. Now, one of the key bits of research in the psychology field was conducted by a pair of psychologists called Masoko and Green. So they conducted this big psychological study in a legal setting, so in a courtroom and sort of juror setting. And from this, they found that there are 5 key characteristics of persuasive stories. And interestingly, these are all really, really relevant to how we communicate with journalists and how we pitch our PR stories. So in the sort of 3 minutes I have remaining, I'm going to whiz through these with you today. So getting straight into it then, the first key characteristic of a persuasive story is imagery. So we all know that the brain literally lights up when we see images. There's sort of research from the University of Minnesota that shows that the human brain processes images 60,000 times faster than text. So if you're trying to get a point across, tell a story, the brain is actually much, much more receptive to images than it is to a big block of text. Now, from a journalist point of view, if you're putting images in their online features, for example, the audiences literally have to spend more time on the feature scrolling through simply because that picture is taking up more space. So if you can be sending images to journalists, then they sort of get a win-win because the story is more engaging and they're also getting more read time on their articles, which is a key KPI for a lot of online journalists. So if you have any sort of images, whether that's, an infographic, a picture of a client that you're sending over, anything you've got, even stock imagery, works really well in sort of making that story more engaging and more persuasive. So the second characteristic that Mazzocco and Green found was realism. So they basically concluded that it's really important that the recipients of the story, or in our cases, an audience that is reading the story, are familiar with the basic human elements of the story. And I think as PRs, we can all agree, we're finding more and more that audiences are becoming more cynical. They're becoming less trustworthy of the stories that we're putting out on behalf of brands. So in order to make our stories more realistic, this is where we can really sort of be incorporating, expert comments or case studies or anything that's going to make your story come to life and really sort of bring it back to the real life context. That is going to make the story really persuasive and engaging for audiences and journalists. Moving on then to the third characteristic of persuasive stories, which is structure. A very simple concept. I'm not going to dwell on it for too long. We all know that a good story needs a strong beginning, a middle, and an end. Again, I'm not going to tell you how to write your pitches because that's completely down to you as your preference as a PR, and it also obviously depends on the story that you're pitching. But I think just making sure that you have that really clear sort of checklist of things that you need to be including, and as I say, having that really sort of strong beginning, middle, and end, so that journalists and audiences can really follow the structure of the story that you're telling. The fourth characteristic of a persuasive story is context. Now, this is an interesting one because I think this is more relevant today in this sort of landscape than ever before. So the research by Mazzocco and Green that I sort of referenced on the previous slide found that basically the persuasiveness of a story is reduced if the given context is deemed inappropriate. So I think we can all agree that the news cycle these days is more controversial, more sort of just mental than ever. So we really need to be considering when it is the right context and when it's appropriate to be sort of, jumping off the back of different trends and news stories, because actually, as we all know, this can really sort of do more harm than good. So actually, in every sort of situation, you need to be considering whether the story you're telling is appropriate given the context. And I know in a lot of our sort of work over the last few months, we've had amazing stories that have had to be pulled because actually the sort of wider context of the news cycle just didn't feel right. So yeah, definitely something to consider. And then finally, the fifth characteristic of a persuasive story is audience. So this sort of ties it back to, I think, pitching to journalists, media relationships, building those relationships with journalists. It's all about clear and considered communication with that journalist. At the end of the day, it's just another person on the end of the screen. So actually, you should be thinking about the audience that you're pitching to, and you should be sort of getting to know their language, pitching in their own language. And this is sort of really backed up by psychological studies. So one study here found that individuals who mirrored the other person were considered more persuasive and were rated more positively. So people liked them better when they were sort of mirroring that behavior, that language, the sort of, the way they behaved. So for journalists, if you can get to know how they write their headlines. So for example, we know the Sun will always start a headline with, say, 2 words. So like holiday hell, and it will normally like include alliteration or a pun. If you can then mirror that in your pitches to the Sun, then you're actually going to appear more persuasive, sort of get in their good books, and more likely to, sort of land that coverage. So yeah, in conclusion, I would say that if you can sort of incorporate these psychological theories into your pitching, and actually just remember that media relations is all about that clear and concise communication, then yeah, you're much more likely to get cut through in a journalist's inbox. So yeah, that's me. Thank you very much. You can catch me on Twitter at Abi Bennetts.
Thanks, Abi. Do you want to shut down your presentation? And
sure.
Come back on screen. Hello, thanks for that. If you've got questions for Abi, by all means, please drop them into the chat. Some really interesting points you made there. Have you ever pitched by just using an image? That's really interesting. It's an obvious point, but it's something I've never thought about before.
Yeah, so I've never pitched with just an image on its own, but I think more and more I'm incorporating more and more images. So even if I haven't created like, a supporting infographic, it's sort of, you don't realize the impact that sort of sending over relevant stock images, or having just a wealth of images to basically back up your story, can really help. Because also journalists, when you think about the practicality of it, journalists are writing, 6 to 8 stories plus a day. If they have to trawl Shutterstock, other stock image sites, then you're actually sort of removing that part of their day as well. So it's kind of a win-win in that sense.
It's a really, really good point. Related, this focus on the human element, again, it's an obvious point, isn't it? But it's something we forget. We want to know stories about each other and human experience. So how important is framing? I mean, how do you persuade a client though that they have to approach that human element?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, and it's actually certainly in the digital PR industry. It's something I think we're seeing more and more in sort of campaigns and sort of PR formats, that people are finding sort of case studies first. So they'll go to, for example, Twitter, TikTok, even just like sort of people who are moaning on Facebook, and then basically find something that's related to that brand or product, and then sort of build the story from there, so that you have that real sort of human interest in the real person behind it. And then that's when you can pull in sort of, the brand that you're working with to comment on this and what this means for, the wider consumers, or, how they can solve that problem that they're experiencing. And we are seeing, sort of great success in terms of pickup, because I think, there is a real sort of need and want in all this like new cycle of misinformation. People are wanting those real life stories, and they're wanting to sort of be related to. So it's an interesting one that I think we're seeing a lot more of. So I think if you can be incorporating those sort of case studies into your stories, it is going to work really well for you. Again,
it strikes me that it is a very obvious point, but it's one that we forget. And if you think about the tabloids, they're right about the cost of living crisis at the moment. There is always 4 or 5 box outs of individual experiences to bring that to life. Interesting point here, Abi. You'll be glad to know Kerry Lynn Doyle, former former journalist to NPR, says you're exactly spot on about images. You wouldn't believe how much time she's spent in previous life chasing images to make a story work.
Amazing. Yeah, that's good.
Have you any? I mean, there's data from, I think it's Propel Media, the tool vendor, published an analysis of 4,000 pitches made during the first quarter of this year, and said journalists opened around 4%. Have you any data from applying these techniques as to how much more effective they make pitching?
Yeah, so no sort of hard, fast data yet, although that is a great idea for a sort of next piece of research and talk. But yeah, I think definitely in terms of just sort of getting journalist feedback on pitches, and certainly sort of coverage rates. I think when you take the time to sort of incorporate those more sort of psychology-backed human communication styles, rather than just sort of your bog standard pitch template, it really does pay off. And it does, as I say, it does sometimes take longer to sort of, get to know the journalist, how they pitch, tweak the headline, all that kind of stuff. But certainly incorporating those things really does make a difference. So yeah.
Mirroring language, again, it's something I hadn't ever thought about before, but how do you go about doing that? Literally just by reading journalist material, the material content that journalists are writing.
Yeah, so I think it's more the sort of subtle tweaks. So for example, like Business Insider and Insider, they sort of like to have top 20s where they'll have, say, top 20 highest earning sports people, and they will have it in a list format. So I remember when we were pitching once a sports campaign, we were pitching to the Sun with sort of a headline, like I said, with that sort of two-pronged headline with, a bit of alliteration, a bit of, more of a tongue-in-cheek sort of style of pitching, whereas Insider was more, here are the facts, here's your top 20 list. So I think actually, literally just mirroring the way they format their sort of articles and features. Again, it's about sort of cutting down that time for journalists, but also speaking to them in a language that they're writing every single day of their lives. So obviously that's going to resonate more than if you're doing your pitch template that you sent to 50 odd journalists or whatever.
Yeah, spelling, pitch spelling. Yeah, no. Abi, time's up. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your stories with you. So images, human element, context, mirroring, 5 clear, very, very clear, clear messages, case studies first. Thank you so much.
For having me.
Thank you for your patience. I enjoyed it.
No worries.
All right. Thanks, Abi. So next up, we've got Brenda. Brenda, do you want to come and say hello? Brenda, hello. Hello. So Brenda runs her own agency. She's going to talk about the authority of experts and playing a long game in pitching. Brenda, you're really welcome. And again, thanks for your patience. Appreciate you were going to speak last month and you're back again. Persuaded you to be back here. I'll hand over to you and let you crack on. If you've any questions for Brenda as we go, please pop them into the chat and I'll pick up the conversation with her in 5 minutes or so. Thanks.
Fantastic. Right. Can you all see my screen okay?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. And can I just check that you can only see the slides?
Yeah, we can't see you.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
fantastic.
Your speaker notes coming up.
Oh, right. Oh, how do I do that then? Sorry, I'm really sorry about this. I'm trying to only show one screen. 1 second. Oh, sorry about this. This is not working very well for me. All right. Okay. Let me do that. That's better. Right. So can you only see?
Yeah, all good.
All right. Fantastic. Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to move things along. Forgive me, people. I'm an absolute Luddite when it comes to technology. And I thought it'd be nice, because I've got so much to say, I thought it would be a good thing to actually provide you with a presentation. But while I'm trying to work this out, I'll just let you know that my name is Brenda Gabriel. As Stephen has said, I run my own agency. I have been doing so for about 9 years now. And one of the areas that I've specialised in is working with experts. So I'm here to talk to you today about working with experts and playing the PR long game. So on to my first slide. Okay, right. So these slides are a little bit packed, but I'm going to explain to you about why that is in a minute. There's quite a lot to say on this. I just want to start off by saying thank you so much for having me. I've been given 5 minutes to talk to you all about working with experts and playing the PR long game, which feels a little bit like when a client hires you for a couple of months and expects you to deliver a 10 times ROI on their retainer fees by week 4. The irony of this challenge is not lost on me. So, but without further ado, let's just dive in. Before we talk about pitching journalists, here's a quick reminder of, what, in my opinion, what it is that a client or an expert client in particular wants. So I've got my 3 eyes up there, which are impact, and then I've kind of done a little, I've qualified that underneath there, influence and income. And in essence, that's why your clients are coming to you. They want to make an impact. They want more influence. And regardless of what they say, very often they are wanting an income from what it is. They're wanting to increase the income when they work with an agency above, that's why they work with us, or that's what I've found anyway. Influence means they generally want a seat at the table or to take the throne itself, right? They want to be part of the conversation, part of the big conversation that's going on around their area of expertise, or they want to be leading it. And this all comes from a clarity of message and amplification of what it is that they're putting out there. It also builds influence also builds authority and credibility, and what we actually want is ubiquity. So your person wants to be seen everywhere, and in order to be seen as the authority, they want to be seen everywhere. Next part is impact, which obviously happens as soon as someone engages with or has an emotional connection with the content that's been put out. And long-term impact and legacy obviously takes a lot longer to work towards, but the initial impact is that first hit that somebody gets when they see something. Third eye, income. When it's done well, when the PR is done well, increased brand awareness will lead to interest, desire, action, and retention, which is where the consistency comes in. Fame generally is for 15 minutes for anybody, unless something is done to keep somebody relevant and in the public eye. So I always think about my clients as celebrities, basically, and I would advise anyone to think of your client, if you're working with an expert, think like a celeb. What are the things that are going to allow your client to remain relevant at any time, regardless of what's going on in the world? Things that can affect these outcomes. So I've got my 3 Ps, which are perception, positioning, and preparation. And they're pretty self-explanatory. Perception, internal versus external. What I mean by that is how your client perceives themselves is equally, if not more important than how they are perceived externally by their audience, by the market. And there needs to be a balance of how it is they view themselves versus how it is that they're seen. And that's obviously what we're working towards when we're working with our clients. Positioning, of course, is how they are positioned. How do they see themselves positioned? Do they believe that they are the Harrods of the market when actually the market perceives them as Primark? We want to make sure that that's in alignment too. And then preparation. And one of the things I'm quite passionate about is making sure that my clients are emotionally prepped for what's about to happen with regards to them being put out there, just as much as they are operationally prepped in terms of making sure that their website is right, that their back end is sorted out, that if actually they go on to Good Morning Britain or onto any other publication and then their product goes viral, that they actually have the back end systems in place to actually deal with that if that happens, right? Because everybody wants to be famous until it happens, but are they ready to deal with that when it actually happens? 1 second, just get the rest of my notes up. Oops. Right, okay. Sorry, speeding back. Right, so the long game strategy is what I like to call win, 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 win. And in that strategy, everybody wants to win. We want everyone to win. We want our client to win. We want the journalist to win. We want the publication to win. We want the reader to win. And what I mean by that is, what is it that each of these people want when a piece of coverage goes out? Well, the client obviously wants to be positioned as the go-to expert. They want to be seen as amazing. They want to get their personality across. They want to share what it is that they want to share. The journalist obviously has to get paid for the work that they're writing about. So you want to make sure that you are pleasing them with what it is that you are approaching them with. Same with the publication, but same with the reader. And very often I think that sometimes we can get so caught up in what it is that the client wants and that we forget that at the other end of it, we're trying to make an impact with the reader. So yeah. And a winning pitch formula. So this is something that really changed my life when I learned it. So a winning pitch formula follows this methodology: CHIEFS, which stands for controversy or celeb, humor, information, event, finance, shocks, scandal, sex, or stats. So in essence, if you have one or two of these things, that makes an okay story. If you have 3 or more of these items when you're creating a pitch, you are almost not, I'm not going to say you're guaranteed, but you're almost guaranteed to get to pique someone's a journalist's attention when it comes to it. So please take this down, because it really changes things. And if you just look through it and you also work through it with your clients as well, I find that's really helpful to help them understand exactly what it is that a journalist is looking for. So I've got 9 tips rather than 5 for winning the PR long game. What you want is to take a holistic view of your client and their business for the best pitches. And what I mean by that is they may be an expert in leadership or cars or something or other, but that doesn't mean that you can't take a holistic view. Sometimes actually looking at other areas of their lives or whatever is actually going to help you get that placement over and above what they're an expert in. And I find personally it's a lot easier to do because human interest is always for the win. Perfect example of that happened a couple of weeks ago for one of my clients. He is very well known for working in the car industry, has done some amazing stuff there, really wants to get some stuff out there about his tech. But the way that I was able to get him onto TV, onto GB News, was to actually talk about the fact that he used to work with boats, and it was about the P&O disaster that's happened. So I found an angle there, and then I was able to get him onto that program within a couple of days. Whereas if we'd have gone down the path that he'd wanted to, then that would have never happened. So always think about, find out as much as you can about your client and keep doing that. Second thing, full features and commentaries, in my opinion, trump mentions always. So if we're looking at, my brand of PR is called Fame PR, because in essence, I am treating my clients like celebrities. I want to see them everywhere. I want to make sure that they're getting the biggest features and they're getting good commentaries, and they're actually out there as the go-to expert in their area. So yes, mentions are great, but I will always try and go for more full features and commentaries where possible. Make sure that your client is actually ready for fame or ready for PR, full stop. I'm sure if you're all experts here, you know what that means generally, but I like to go a little bit deeper and actually help them understand what it is that may come up. So I've had instances where clients have been trolled in the past. You know, somebody's been called fat, somebody has had a whole group talk badly about her as a result of some of the PR that's come out about them. Not that it wasn't good PR, it was great PR, but it made them exposed. So I like to let clients know that, you know, there's a potential that they can be exposed, and are they actually ready for that when it comes. Sanitize social presence in advance. That goes without saying. You want to make sure you're going through their I never understand when these celebrities say something really silly or something gets dug up from like 3 years ago. And it's such a surprise that somebody's got hold of this tweet. Like that stuff, as far as I'm concerned, if you've got an agent or a manager or a publicist, all of that stuff should have been dealt with ages ago. So make sure that your clients are either going through their social presence or you're doing that for them when you hook up with them, so that because the bigger they grow is the more dirt that somebody's looking for them. Aim to build long-term relationships, not media lists. I think that's really important, building relationships with the journalists, because even if you can't help them this time or they can't help you this time, there may be a time further down the line where they can actually help you, or vice versa. So I always aim to be helpful to them, regardless of whether they're actually placing my story or not. Don't be afraid to be sensationalist when you pitch. Some of my best pitches, or the ones that have really landed a total tabloid headlines, such as I think one of them was woman who has rainbow baby, gives birth to, you know, has 10 in, what was it? Something to do with a woman who had got pregnant with rainbow baby after losing some twins, and then her grandfather came to her in a dream and told her she was still pregnant. So it proper sounds like, you know, pick me up, take a break stuff, but it worked, and we actually got several pieces of coverage off the back of that, and some continued coverage. Don't be afraid of tabloids. To me, tabloids are the most, are some of the best ways to get your clients out there. And it's got a much bigger audience, right? It's a much wider audience. I've had clients have people say to them, oh, you know, you're better than the Sun, or you're better than this, or you're better than that. And actually, when they've actually landed in the Daily Mail or the Sun or whatever, the trajectory of their business has gone like that because of the exposure that they've had. And usually, TV follows print in that respect. So if it hits the Daily Mail, you've got a better, if you're trying to get your client onto TV to talk about what it is they're talking about, you've got a much better chance of it happening if it lands in one of those newspapers than if it, say, lands in the Independent or whatever. And that's, I'm saying from personal experience. My other piece of advice is approach with the idea that your pitch is TV worthy. And as I just said, the key to securing broadcast coverage, remember that TV follows news. So if you're in the longer term, you're wanting to get your client onto TV, kind of approach your pitches and the story and the way you're pulling together your stories as if that there is something that you want to get, you know, you want to get a documentary about, or you want to have a news feature about. And the final thing is leverage celebrity to elevate your client by association. So that's one thing that I tend to do with clients. So whether it's linking them to the royal family in some way, that's been a brilliant way. I had someone go viral across the world because they wrote, they had spoken about the way that the Cambridge's parents, we got about 45 pieces of coverage in a week across the world, because we've managed to obviously leverage their name. So now they are referred to as a royal parenting expert, which is amazing. And again, if you can somehow attach your client's name to a celeb or somebody who's a celeb within their industry, then that's also a good way of getting some good coverage as well. sample pitch. So I've just written a few bullet points here for what makes a good pitch. So I don't know if you'll have heard any of these bits before, but one way that I find is a good way, particularly when I'm dealing with people like Business Insider or Forbes even, is thanking them and making a reference to their previous work, the impact it's had on me and what action I have taken as a result of that. So I'm actually making a genuine connection with them. I'll intro my client with credibility markers around what makes them an expert. What is the story or link behind the topic my client wants to comment on? So I will go in and sort of say, right, you know, my client, you know, if say it was something to do with, I don't know, going sober over the pandemic or something like that, I'll talk about how an experience that my client may have had with regards to that, and then thread it in that way. What results have my client got to prove their value in this area? So I'll talk about some of the results that they've got with their clients, or any work that they've got. Again, more credibility markers. Where else has my client been featured? Obviously, that's another credibility marker. You know, well, you know, Vogue thought that they were amazing, or, you know, the Daily Mail thought that they were amazing, so you should too. I'll add links and contact details for myself, but also my clients. So I'll sort of say, you know, contact me at any time, contact me at any time. Here's my email, here's my phone number, and also here are the contact details for my client, because you don't want to make a journalist work too hard to actually get the information. So if you can provide that up front for them and they don't have to click anywhere else, I find that's also really helpful. And I can't actually see my final my final thing. 1 second. Right. Yeah, and the boilerplate, which you all know about anyway, adding your 100-word media bio at the bottom of that, which I find is really useful. So final parting tips for you guys. Go big or go home. What is the ultimate goal for your client long beyond the 6 or 12-month contract for them? So I will ask my client, you know, where are we going with this? Like, what is it that you want in 5 or 10 years time into the future? Are they looking to be verified on social media? Are they looking for an honor? Are they looking to have their own TV show? Would they like to have a documentary meant about themselves? And then I adjust my strategy according to what this bigger vision is, even if I'm only going to be working with them for 6 months, because I find it's much easier to kind of sort of future project and then work backwards as to what it is that I want. And then I can explain to them at any point, look, the reason we're doing this, or the reason we are going down this path, or we're not going down this path, is because this is your vision. Remember, this is the vision that you had for yourself. Human interest trumps facts, as I said. Make your client a 4D hero of their story or journey. Think laterally. So, you know, it doesn't always have to be about their area of expertise. It could be about their weight loss journey. It could be about absolutely anything about their parenting. There could be any way of threading in some area, as long as it's in alignment, as long as they get a way to say what it is that they want to say, and it's not going to make them look bad in any way, then I generally leverage almost any angle about my clients to get the pitch. Build relationships that go beyond a pitch, goes without saying. Make it easy for the journal or the outlet to say yes. So you want to make sure that you make things as easy as possible for them. An example of this is if you're approaching a tabloid to get a story out there, I can tell you from now, one of the things that they love is lots of pictures, particularly somewhere like the Daily Mail. They, you know, so if you've got the pictures there, send them some little thumbnails of the photos attached to the story that you're putting forward to them. They love that. Always presume that they haven't seen the first pitch. And the reason that I've said that is the fortune is always in the follow-up with these things. Very often you can believe that somebody hasn't seen your pitch, or they're not interested. They're not interested in what it is that you have to say. And that's not true. So a perfect example of that, I'm going to use myself for this one, is I put myself forward as somebody who looks younger than I am, someone who looks half my age, because I have been mistaken for my eldest son's girlfriend before. And I pitched myself for that 1 week, didn't hear anything back for it, waited a few weeks, and then later on pitched myself again for it to exactly the same woman, and she thought it was amazing. And then it went into the newspapers, it went viral. Well, I say viral. It got a few pickups across the board. And again, you know, had I not followed up on that one, I would have never, you know, I would have just presumed that she wasn't interested in me, or she thought I was older than I actually looked. Whatever.
Brenda, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's it. This is it. Yeah, this is it. So yeah, remember, the fastest way from A to B is a straight line, no matter where you've been. And the reason I say this is that no matter what it is that you're taught as a publicist or PR expert, There will be things that you will do when you're having relationships with people or building relationships to actually get you across the line. So do not be afraid to fall back on those bits and use your magic, use your own magic to get your point across. I think that.
Brenda, what a cracking presentation. Again, a couple of points there that you've pulled from the Echo Abi in the first session, the idea of images first. Also, that I'm really interested in exploring this area of emotional preparation for spokespeople, because I think you're absolutely spot on. We were talking about the Wagatha Christie case and the stress those individuals must be under at the moment, but related to that case. But I'm afraid we're going to have to move on because we're up against time. But you know, you took 50 minutes. That's more than happy. It was like an absolute masterclass in publicity, and thank you very much. So next up is Will Hobson from Rise at 7. He's here to talk about Brenda. Can you close down your deck? Great. So Will, hello.
Hello. How are you doing?
Thanks. I'm good. I'm really, really good. Good to see you. You're going to talk about the one sentence pitch.
I am.
I'm absolutely intrigued by this because I'm a big fan of Newsjacking, big fan of the work at Rise at 7, and you know, look forward to hearing what you've got to say. Stage is yours.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Well, thanks for having me. I'm very excited. Presuming you can see my screen okay, I'll just pop into slideshow mode. So great, I'm Will Hobson. I'm going to be talking about Newsjacking and the one sentence pitch. I've been working in the industry for about, so there we go. Slide etiquette. I've been working in the industry for about 10 years. So I work for Rise at 7. So we're a search first creative agency. And one of the things that we do is something called Newsjacking that I'll talk through in a second. But we do that for multiple different brands. So everything from finance, fashion, travel, automotive, all sorts of different things. And our goal, similar to kind of how what Abi mentioned in terms of what her agency do, our goal is to help build the online brand, really, of the clients that we work with and help them come up in either the search results, but also over TikTok, over social. We just want to build a brand to be the biggest that it can possibly be. Originally, I did start in traditional PR and then moved over to digital about 9 years ago and just fell in love with it with all sorts of random reasons. But I'll get into it. So in the last year, demand for Newsjacking has increased by 29%. So this is pulled from Google Trends. And what I mean by Newsjacking is literally that, jumping on all sorts of different news stories and putting brands that we work with or brands that yourselves work with, if anyone's doing it as well, at the center of those conversations. So it can be anything for a finance brand, for example, that might be things that like Peloton's share prices dipped because of the latest Sex and the City, all the way to kind of what they're wearing at the Wagatha Christie trial. So it can be kind of all sorts of different related to loads of different brands. But we noticed during the pandemic, this kind of service and Newsjacking within itself became more and more in demand. And the reason for that is because the news agenda was obviously constantly changing. And as an agency, what we tended to do was, rather than necessarily stop work with our clients and kind of go into that type of mode, we decided to pivot and shift and make sure that a lot of what we were doing was reacting to trends. So whether it was for travel brands and we were kind of commenting on where the restrictions have moved, if it was for finance brands looking at the retail stores that kind of went into administration, the airlines, all sorts of different things. And you can do that in a super, super quick way and kind of leading into this 1 second pitch, one sentence pitch, should I say, it's definitely something that Newsjacking is so good for, because I tend to utilize Twitter a lot and social media and have a lot of relationships with journalists over there where I'll go, oh my God, have you seen this story of Peloton? Do you want to comment? And that will literally be my pitch. And then I'll have put the comment together and outreached it. So it's really, really fast paced. But off the back of kind of Newsjacking and it becoming more and more demand, we've actually created a service at Rise at 7 called Rise Live, and that's dedicated to reactive PR, content, social, and we're going to be building that out over the next kind of couple of months, but we've kind of built this to be PR specifically first of all, and we're working with a lot of beauty brands, a lot of finance brands, and what we do is we monitor all sorts of media moments, the news, everything that's happening, whether it's through our own tools or through places like Pinterest, looking at what's trending and put our brands brands at the center of that. So I've got a couple of examples. I'll not go into these in too much detail, but just want to show you how can it work for multiple different industries and multiple different areas. So we work with a few different brands across multiple markets. So a good example is something that we did for a brand called Soul Supplier. So they're basically a price comparison site for sneakers in the UK and the US. They came to us because they wanted to be mentioned in all sorts of relevant press quite consistently. So we basically utilize a tool that we've created called Early Risers, which basically looks at site search data on a brand's website. So we can see what people are searching in the search bar on a website, basically overlaid with Google trend data. So we can kind of spot trends as they're rising. And we basically noticed that Crocs were coming back. Press had started to write like Crocs are having a resurgence, they're going everywhere. And boom, Nicki Minaj posted this photo of her in a pair of pink Crocs. We then saw demand on our site increase by 7,000% for pink Crocs. So we were able to put a quick press release together, outreach that to press, and it literally went everywhere and kind of across some of their most streamed publications, from the Billboard magazine to Nylon to Hype Day, like some really, really key publications for them. So as you can see, it's quite a fast process. We spot a media moment, we create a piece of data or an insight, we then outreach that to press. So it can be really, really quick. The kind of one sentence pitch within that can come with, if we're already talking to journalists and keeping up those relationships with them, dropping them a message, just with tends to be our headline of like, okay, demand for pink Crocs has increased by 7,000%. And then we literally just ping that to a journalist. And if they're then interested, we then go forth and send our release. So super, super quick and super fast paced. And this can be kind of related to multiple different markets. Another good market is jewelry and jewelers. What we tend to do with that strategy is look at things like celebrity engagements. We're looking at kind of anytime a celebrity is going to get engaged, we'll put out a comment. So just evaluating the ring. So thinking over the past year, we've obviously had Courtney and Travis. That was huge. We were kind of one of the first to get to People magazine and say, look, this is how much the ring's valued at. We'll then put that commentary out. And the beauty of this type of strategy is we tend to have, once we've kind of been known that we were good at this comment, good at this type of commentary and type of strategy, a lot of journalists come to us. So this happens across multiple different kind of industries, but particularly within jewelry, places like Hello magazine, People magazine in the US will be coming to us and saying, Jen and Brad are getting married. Like, what do you think? Add this in. So all sorts of different things like that. So you're able to kind of build consistency and actually have journalists coming to you, which is like a gold dust in the type of strategy that we want to do. So how to land press in one sentence. I've come up with just 4 tips that I'll talk through, that just things that I've noticed over the past couple of years that have really helped with being able to land press very, very quickly and also keeping it super relevant to your brand. So speed, get ready to react within the first 30 to 60 minutes. Something that we're quite strict on, but also honest with brands that work with us. So if someone wants to start utilizing Rise Live and this strategy, I'll kind of say at the onboarding process, that's fine. Like, we can do, this is what we can do, and this is the strategy we can do, but it needs to be fast. So we'll need instant messaging set up. We'll need sign off within 30 to 60 minutes of a story breaking. Good example here is something that we did for a finance brand called about Peloton. So obviously I'm not spoiling because anyone's not watched the latest Sex and the City, but something happened with Peloton and a very big character, and their share price just dipped massively. So this happened overnight because it was obviously in the US. We woke up the next day and said, look, we need a comment saying XXX in the next like 30 minutes. And they were like, great, got to go. So we're very honest with the speed. Like, it needs to be fast because otherwise you're going to miss the story. Like, I think a story like that has like a shelf life of a couple of hours really. And then relating it to fashion as well, there might be another story that comes up that can totally throw that story out. So I always remember the Billboard Awards last year. Megan Fox wore like a really sheer dress, and we were doing a lot of dupes for it for the fashion brands that we work with. However, the Met Gala came out the next day and it just totally threw everyone out the window because obviously everyone was talking about the Met Gala. It's a bigger story. And our client at the time wanted to repush Billboard. I was like, well, look, Billboard's done now. It's now Met Gala. So that speed is really, really kind of crucial when it comes to this type of strategy. The second point would be offering value. So if you're utilizing anything like newsjacking or commentary or anything where you're trying to add value to an article, make sure that you don't just relay the story. You're going to need to add an opinion. So thinking back to that Peloton example that I've just mentioned, we didn't just relay what everyone already knew. We then discussed, well, what was the future for Peloton? What was the opinion of the analysts that we're given? So an opinion is really, really crucial when you're talking about kind of newsjacking and commentary-led pieces, because otherwise, from a journalist perspective, you're not adding any value to that article. They know what's happened. Everyone's talking about that story. You need to then give something, whether it's opposing opinion or that extra opinion. Thirdly, would write your email, which a few people have spoken about today, but write your email subject lines in your actual email like a journalist would an article. So we're very to the point with our emails, and that's what I meant with kind of that one sentence pitch. They don't even always have to be an email. It can literally just be the headline that we've then sent to a journalist over social media or over email, something that's going to move really, really fast. We try and do all the work more or less to make it as easy as possible for that journalist to cover your story. Make sure you're utilizing social media, such as Twitter. Don't rely on just traditional methods. So like I said, making sure that if it's obviously you need to keep boundaries in terms of making sure that journalist actually uses their Twitter account, but making sure that you build that relationship with them and keep going back and forth. So it's kind of making sure with reactive strategies that you're kind of straight to the point, you're fast, you're making sure it's super relevant to your brand, you're adding an opinion and making sure it's really valuable, and you're utilizing different methods of communication when you're speaking to a journalist. It doesn't have to be just about picking up the phone and talking to them. We need to be doing things quite fast and doing a lot of the legwork and the hard work for them, which is cool. But yeah, I told you it's fast this, but yeah, that's me.
I love your energy. Do you want to close the deck down?
Yes.
Again, a bit short on time, but one question about, I mean, it's come up already in the chat. How do you get clients to sign this stuff off at pace and agree to work with you with the sort of newsroom pace that you need to do this?
Yeah, I think it's definitely about trust. So building that trust from the beginning. So when we start working with the client, we are quite open in terms of like, look, this is what we're going to need from you. This is how this strategy is going to work. And it's a lot of instant messenger. I mean, I'm thinking like recently, we've just started working with the beauty brand, and we literally like the actual client. This was why I knew that this client was perfect for us. She said, do you know what? I don't want to hear from you on email. I want you to WhatsApp me. She's like, because I get so many emails, I'm not going to get back to you. And that does work fast because we're literally like, look, we've seen this story, we need to go for it. She's like, right, great, go for it. So I think it is about building that trust, having ways of communication with the right client. It's not going to work for everyone. So I think it is about matching that kind of client personality with yourselves and then showing them what you can do. And then you've built that trust, because we've got a couple of clients that we don't actually even have to have sign off from anymore. They just trust us to go with the right story, and we are obviously cautious that nothing's necessarily going to have any sort of backlash. But yeah, I definitely think it's about building that trust and finding the right way of communicating with them.
Final question from Scott. When you're sending images, how do you do it? Body of an email, attachment through Dropbox? Just
Dropbox mainly, or a link to it. The reason we do that is because we're trying not to clog up anyone's inbox. So we keep everything in the body of the email. We don't attach anything, and it is literally like a Dropbox link that would be like, images are here. We might put the image within the email if it's like a longer piece, but yeah, we don't attach anything.
Will, thank you very much.
No problem.
Love your energy, love your pace. Another great presentation.
Cool. Thanks for having me. Speak soon.
Thank you. Bye now. Right. Finally, we're joined by Fenella Rickards from Hotwire, who's going to talk about an initiative developed by her agency during COVID to build stronger relationships. Ben, hello. Welcome.
Hi. Thanks for having
me. You have, I reckon you have the most elegant Waddscon presentation deck ever. Do you want to bring it up?
I'll just share my screen.
The stage is yours.
Cool. Can everyone see that?
Sorry, yeah, we're good.
Perfect. Okay, cool. So thanks for the introduction. I'm here to talk about developing stronger media relations according to my agency, Hotwire. I'm Fenella Rickards. I'm a senior program executive at Hotwire. I've been there for around 1.5 years, 2 years, and I was also another B2B tech agency before this. So what this means is that I've been pitching the media like day in, day out for the last 2 years. And that's what I'm going to talk about, the sort of changes we've seen and some of the learnings and what we've done about it. So let's start at the beginning. As Stephen said, got the sleekest deck imaginable. So start at the beginning. I think it goes without saying that the pandemic changed how PRs and media like connected. I'm sure everyone here knows that. So limited social interactions, fewer media meets, no journalist coffees. I think, you know, virtual briefings were virtual meets were an option, but, you know, everyone's been on Zoom all day. That's the last thing they want after, you know, a long day of being on Zoom. In certain circumstances, it was like near impossible to get journalists on the phone. You know, editorial teams were shrinking. At the worst case scenario, publications were going under. So it just became a lot more difficult. And what did this mean? Well, for one, it meant leaning harder on existing contacts. Obviously, you know, a stronger reliance on tech to pitch. So, you know, emails, of course, Twitter, even LinkedIn. In some ways, this was beneficial. I think it made us look at the way that we write pitches, you know, making them as succinct and, you know, as concise as possible, making them shorter, just as to the point as possible. But I think that it also meant that bad habits easily crept into our behaviour. So obviously, it's a lot harder to get journalist feedback. It was a lot harder to get, you know, journalist interest, to get coverage. And I think there was a temptation to maybe increase the pool of journalists you're going out to. So maybe there's less relevant journalists in your pitching. So what did we do about it? Well, we sat down and as an agency, we thought about how we can work smarter, not harder, and sort of get past these barriers that were holding up our pitching in this time. And what we realized it ultimately came down to was managing media relations as a team, pitching as a team, and just sharing insights, as many journalist insights, many media insights as we possibly could, rather than taking an individual approach, rather than, you know, the siloed way of working that we maybe previously had been doing. So as part of a wider initiative, we started Hot Relationships. We love a good pun at Hotwire, you'll have to excuse that one. Basically what it was a initiative set up to encourage staff from all across the comms team to just basically improve their media relations. And we did this using incentives. So there were rewards, and the way you could win rewards were obviously setting up media meets, journalist coffees, drinks, whatever, sharing key journalist insights. So who's moved where, what's their new beat, what's their new title, you know, who's taking interviews at the moment, who's taking bylines, that kind of thing. And obviously, of course, securing top tier coverage for our clients. We also set up a media ninja scheme. So execs would take a particular area of the media landscape, so a vertical or a particular topic area, and they would be responsible for it in terms of sharing insights across the agency, as well as, you know, being a beacon of knowledge for other people in the agency who are, you know, going into that topic. We also still have a monthly exec check-in where, you know, we catch up on what the news hooks are, what the upcoming awareness days are, how we can share our knowledge and collaborate on pitching to improve our results and, like, ultimately just make our jobs and our lives easier by sharing the lows. So the end. What were the results that came out of this? I think it's undoubtable that this has changed the way, like, we approach media relations probably forever. It's not that we weren't doing all of these things before, like, we were doing them, but it's formalizing them in these processes into these kind of initiatives. I think it increases accountability whilst sharing the load across the team, but it also produces more than just sort of, you know, coverage for your clients. Like, obviously that's part of it. Obviously this has definitely contributed to us, you know, producing more top tier coverage for our clients. But I think that everything you do, every piece of, you know, journalist insight, every piece of media knowledge that you gain, I think it really just demonstrates further the depth and the breadth of our knowledge of the industry, and it ultimately just shows your clients, like, how, you know, it cements your expertise in the area and just making them feel more confident in your work. And I think as well, obviously we've seen that this has been, like, a far better approach for journalists. So we're obviously sending them more relevant pitches. We're not spamming them. Like, with certain journalists, we'll like assign an owner. So the person with the best relationship, everything will go through them. They're not, you know, they're getting one email from Hotwire, they're not getting 10. And it just means, I think, they're more receptive to us. They're more receptive to our pitches. They know who we are. But I think the most important thing that's come out of this initiative is that it's just it's the way that we look at media relations and the way that we treat it. And you know, the media landscape is changing every single day. Like, journalists are moving, journalists are changing their beat, like they're changing what they need from us. Like, publications are, you know, closing down, like they're getting smaller, and we just need to be receptive to that. And we basically need to form our way of working around that, so that journalists are receptive to us, and basically just so that we can create the best results possible for our clients. Yeah, and then that's me. I hope that I hope something interesting came out of that for you, and I hope that you can take something interesting away from it.
Brilliant presentation. Thanks, Fenella. Do you want to shut your deck down? And if anyone's got any questions, by all means, please jump into the chat. Fenella, the idea of sharing media intelligence across or journalist intelligence across an agency is really interesting. You know, we probably should be doing it from a point of view of best practice. How do you overcome competitive issues, though? You know, people wanting to wanting to own a relationship with a journalist and not being willing to share data.
Do you mean like internally between different?
Yeah. Did that ever arise as an issue?
I mean, I wouldn't say that I've ever seen it arise. I can't speak for everybody, but I do think that it comes down to just like everyone is respectful of each other's boundaries, and ultimately, I think it's not really about, you know, it's about the team, and ultimately, I think people realize that actually, it doesn't matter if it's you pitching them. If someone has the relationship, and if they can ultimately that lead to the coverage you want, or the, you know, increase, if they can lead the coverage you want, then that's the main thing. If we can make our clients happy, and ultimately it's just really obvious, like the journalist is going to be much happier if they're receiving less emails and they're receiving more relevance.
Oh yeah, absolutely, no doubt. It will be interesting actually after today's session to do a journalist perspective on you know, all the issues that we've discussed. Sort of related point, how did you share information within the team? Did you have a knowledge management system? Have you got some sort of super media database? How did you do that?
So, well, as I said, we have catch-ups within the execs, and then we pull all our information, and then we share it with the teams, like on Slack, and you know, in our like account catch-ups. But it's just catch-ups. And I don't think we've now like started formulating like shared docs. So I think we've always tried to do this, tried to have, you know, sharing information docs, you know, everyone update with, you know, who's moved and who's getting interest here, and what are you securing for this topic. But I think finally, because this has been launched, and as I say, it's like creates a bit more accountability in terms of media relations, I think people are finally starting to like make sure they're updating these docs, and just so it's more of like a live document, so people can just dip in and out. And yeah, just generally, I feel like just catching up as often as can when.
So stop. What has Hotwire stopped using media databases? Does this replace the media database, or is it sort of
no, I don't. We're not
intelligence layer on top?
It's just sort of on top, yeah. But I think because we use a few, but like with some of them you can sort of like add in your own notes. And as I say, like with certain journalists, we sort of try and like own relationships. So yeah, just putting notes where relevant, and just say like making it clear if someone has a good relationship, because it's not really about the individual, it's more about, you know, the output and the results. So, and I think everyone can see that.
Yeah, got it. Fenella, thanks so much. It's such a thoughtful presentation about bringing a smart approach to an intelligent approach to media relations and knowledge sharing within a team or an agency. I really appreciate that. So that's Waddscon done for the month, just in time for Prime Minister's questions. About to kick off in a minute or so. Next month, we're back to talk about newsjacking and responsive PR, actually picking up on many of the issues that speakers, notably Will, talked about today. Until then, I want to thank all our speakers, Abi, Brenda, Will, and lastly, Fenella. And thank you all for joining, and look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you very much.